Hello and welcome back to the F2 show. I'm your host Fraser Ford, and joining me to look ahead to this weekend, we have F1 Feeder Series podcast host Jim Kimberley and Inside F2 writers Lawrence Griffin and Aaron Harper. Coming up on the show then, we look ahead to Formula 2 returning to France for the first time in a few years. Track limits were a big talking point last time out. Will that be the same again this weekend? And we have the small matter of being in the middle of a championship battle. We take a look at that as well. Alrighty then, lads on the show today. Aaron, Jim, Lawrence, great to have you with us. Jim, we'll come to you first. Everyone in the UK is moaning about the heat at the moment. You're in Mexico right now. You're pretty used to it, aren't you?
Yeah, it's much cooler here because we have air conditioning, so it's fantastic. But the humidity is high and does make it feel hotter. But I've done enough UK summers where it's hot and sticky, and the best thing you can do is put a fan on, and it just blows the warm air around the room a little bit more. So I do send my sympathies from my lovely air-conditioned room, which I'm just going to decrease it to 21 degrees, actually, guys. Yeah, nice.
We're going to move on from Jim ASAP. Lawrence, coping with the heat? I've got to be honest, I'm sweltering. Are you coping with it?
Yeah, just about. But if I start to make no sense later on the podcast, you know what's happened. Call an ambulance.
We'll keep an eye on.
But no, managing to look after myself.
We'll keep an eye on the comments, and if the comments start going wayward, we'll know you're struggling with a bit of heat stroke. Aaron, if it's pretty hot in the UK right now. If you're going to be hot, you might as well be hot in the south of France, right?
Yes, absolutely. And there's no place to do that than on a racetrack as well.
Exactly that. Really looking forward to this weekend. Let's take a look at the championship standings going into this weekend then. Felipe Drugovich retained his championship lead last time out, but Logan Sargent is edging ever closer after really finding his form over the last few rounds. Teo Pourchaire, Jehan Daruvula sit third and fourth. They'll be hoping for strong weekends to continue their push. And Enzo Fittipaldi and Marcus Armstrong round out the top six. In the team standings, MP Motorsport are still at the top of the standings, but their lead was reduced to just 1 point by Carden last time out. Home race for ART this weekend, they sit third. Prema, Hitech and Charouse round out the top six. And as always, the full standings are available on our website, www.insidef2.com. Okay, first time back at Le Castellet since 2019. Seems a while ago. Nick De Vries and Anthoine Hubert were the winners last time we were there. He'll be in our thoughts this weekend, I'm sure. But it's produced, I think it's fair to say, it's produced some pretty boring races over the years, but a decent F1 race last year. Some decent F3 races. Jim, are you looking forward to Formula 2 returning?
I guess if we're not going to go to Russia, we might as well replace it with something equally as fun. So I'd say it's fair that we can go to Le Castellet. Am I looking forward to it? I'm looking forward to Formula 2 racing because it's Formula 2 and I really like watching Formula 2. But yeah, I was briefly catching up on some of the F3 races from last year just before I came on to refresh myself, because although I remember them being entertaining, I believe a lot of that entertainment was me being surprised with how not boring they were. So it wasn't like they stuck in my memory because they were brilliant. The biggest thing I remember was it was piddling down with rain in one of the races, and that Victor Martin was terrific in Formula 3, and unfortunately he never graduated this year, which is a crying shame, I'd say. So yeah, looking forward to it. Bit of a stretch. Glad to have Formula 2 racing in this crazy July of 4 races, but yeah, I don't know. The big thing I think will be the sprint race will be or should be entertaining, because there are so many straights that you can pass on with DRS zones and whatnot that you might see some overtakes, and Formula 2 is not exactly short on them usually. But after what we've had at Silverstone and Austria, even though we had some, like one of those races each not being most entertaining, I'm think it's a bit of a step down going to France, to be completely honest.
Yeah, fair enough. It's I wouldn't say it's a fan favourite circuit, but as you say, good to have some Formula 2 racing on this weekend. Formula 3, obviously, as you say, was there last year, even though Formula 2 hasn't been back for a little while. Jack Doohan was a winner there in Formula 3 last season. Dennis Hauger on the podium a couple of times. A maiden podium for Callum Williams as well. Will they take a bit of confidence into this weekend, Lawrence?
Well, yeah, those results they had last season certainly can't hurt. That experience should help, should give them an extra bit of confidence, and certainly make it easier for them to go straight into what is such a short practice session, hit the ground running, and qualify really well. It will certainly be easier than having to learn a tight street circuit like a Monaco or a Jeddah, for example. And equally, like you say, other drivers that have stepped up to F2 this season from F3 will also benefit from that experience. But I think those names you've mentioned, Doohan, Hauger, and Williams should get a particular benefit and a particular little boost in confidence, knowing that they've performed well here in the past. And Hauger put on a great performance to win in the rain. He looked really, really commanding, really strong in that race to win in the rain last year. Unfortunately, no forecast of rain for this weekend to spice things up, but he'll still have that in his memory, and he'll still use that to motivate himself going into this weekend. So we saw back in Barcelona earlier this year, several of the rookies performed a little better on a circuit that they were a bit more familiar with. So maybe we can expect to see a similar sort of step in performance at this point. But I think at this stage in the season, they're all gaining experience, and I think they're already driving at a really good level. So I think that you should probably not see as much of a jump as we saw in Barcelona. But yeah, they'll definitely take extra confidence into this race.
Yeah, really interested to see how the rookies get on. Aaron, obviously, as we say, not historically been the most entertaining race. I think that's fair to say. Is that a circuit issue? Is that first of all, on paper, it looks like there's quite a few overtaking opportunities, but it hasn't necessarily transpired that way, has it?
No, it doesn't always work out like that. But we have seen, if you can get it right, that the possibilities of overtaking are there, like into the chicane on the Mistral Straight. If you're really brave into turn 1 and you're feeling fully send into maybe turn 3. But we've also seen cars go side by side through the fast right-hander. I think it's turn 10 or 11 out the back. So there's opportunities there if your car is in the right position. But also, you've got to set your car up properly. And this is a track that, especially if it's as hot as we think it could be down in the south of France this week, the tyres could melt. So if anyone can look after their tyres, then they're going to be in good shape, because you're going to need to look after those front tyres, especially the front left through the final sector, and have good traction through the long right-hander of 6 and 7 onto that back straight. So a driver who can look after his tyres well and is good on the brakes will do well. So immediately Felipe Drugovich springs to mind, because we know how good he is on the tyres. So if anyone can match him for tyre life and tyre preservation, then they're going to have a chance. But Drugovich is going to have his work cut out, because there are some mighty fast drivers in the field, and it's going to be super competitive, and they're all going to want to make their mark. So you've got Sargent, who's massively on form. You're going to have Pourchaire, who's going to want to put on a show for his home crowd. And there's going to be other drivers, like Lawrence mentioned, feeling a bit more comfortable at a track that they know, wanting to perform and wanting to kickstart the second half of their season.
Yeah, the advantage Felipe Drugovich obviously has is that he's about 600 points clear, isn't he? So, we'll see how that goes on. Jim, I'm going a bit off script here, but there's two drivers that have, on the full-time drivers, I must add, on the 2022 Formula 2 grid, who have driven in Formula 2 at the Castellet. Do you know who they are, who those two drivers are?
Jakey, I guess. Jake Hughes? One of them? I don't think it's both. No?
No, not sure.
Have you asked Jim that because it's Ralph Boschung?
Jim, what is this?
I would
guess
Ralph Boschung, but he's busy being injured right now. I wasn't thinking he's a full-time driver. I don't know if he's even finishing the season.
All right, fair enough. I'm thinking drivers that started the season, but Ralph Boschung is one. Roy Nissany also drove back in 2018, which shows how long he's been in Formula 2. A lot of Formula 2 experience.
For those who don't, maybe not regular viewers of the podcast, Jim is a very big fan of Ralph Boschung, but apparently one neck injury and you forget all about him. So that shows Mr. Kimberley is a fickle man.
He is always in my thoughts. And I tell you what, Lawrence, as well, that neck injury sounds awful. Did you hear about the detail of it? I can't remember the name of it, and I do apologise, Ralph. But when I Googled a little bit about it. It was awful to race a car with that level of injury. There's no surprise that he's not racing. So, yeah, excuse me if I'm not considering him a full-time driver at the moment. He's done already, how many rounds has he missed? Like half the season. He's missed Spain, Monaco, Silverstone, Red Bull Ring, full-time driver. Get off it, guys.
I think I'll let him off. I think it's fair enough. We'll talk.
He escapes on that one just about.
Just about. We'll let him off. Okay, we'll come back to Ralph Boschung shortly. At the moment in Formula 2, there's one man that is on an absolute mission, and that's Logan Sargent, winner of the last 2 feature races in a row. Can he make it 3 in a row, Jim? Is that possible?
The last 2 feature races in a row. Did he, though? Like, that's the question. Did he win both of them?
I'm reading
well.
off of the race results.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he got full points on Sundays, and can he do it again? Yeah, he looks quick. He looks really quick at the circuits that he knows. His season's really starting to come around, that he's got as much chance as anybody else. I do think that the technical penalties that were handed out, which essentially handed him the win, somewhat change that perception. And you shouldn't look past Richard Rashaw, because he did a terrific job. And I don't know how he finished that far ahead and still didn't manage to have a fuel sample. That was unfortunate. But Logan's he's completely started to shoot up the championship, like he's doing something different. He's top point scorer, I think, in the last 3 rounds, and at current rates could catch Felipe if he has another showing like he did, well, either of the last 3 weekends, while Djokovic still didn't win in any of these. So we saw the last couple of years that the championship leader around this point isn't necessarily going to win the championship. I don't know if Logan's going to be the man to win it, but he certainly looked like he could be a champion. So if he takes a win either the sprint race or the feature race this weekend, I think then he's going to have to start being called a championship favourite.
Championship favourite? You think that much? That's how good his form is in it, that you'd categorise him as a championship favourite?
A championship favourite.
Okay. Clarifying your words. Fair enough. Lawrence, he's the highest placed rookie by quite some distance. 48 points. He's the highest placed rookie. Looking back, did he benefit in any way from having an outing in Jeddah in a Formula 2 car at the end of last season? Would that have impacted at the start of this season?
I think so, because that gives him a chance to get used to the car, the power of the car, the braking performance and the extra weight, all of those things which are different in comparison to F3. And he has the chance to take all of that in and sort of bank that knowledge and put it away and use it to prepare mentally for the following season. So he starts this year already with an idea of what he was going into, which perhaps has just put him a step ahead of a couple of the other rookies. He seems to have started at a really good level this year and has had really good consistency, which we've spoken about a lot on this podcast. But he has still shown development. He has still been learning. So it's not that one session, that one outing gave him all of the knowledge he could possibly need. It's still been a bit of a learning curve for him. And equally, you look at the likes of Jack Doohan, who raced in Jeddah and Abu Dhabi last year and got straight into pole position at the first round this year. And you think, well, that's brilliant. That experience has led right into this season. But then he's not managed to actually carry that through the whole season as a result. So I think although that knowledge helps, it can't fully explain Sargent's performance this year. I think to say, well, he had a head start on the other rookies would be really unfair. So, regardless of that experience, you have to perform well week in, week out. And even drivers that are way more experienced than Logan Sargent have failed to produce that this year. So I think whilst it helps, I think he has to you have to think of it as this is just a very talented driver rather than one that got an extra sort of helping hand before the start of this year.
Yeah, he's in great form. Looking forward to see what he can do this weekend. Another rookie who has momentum with him, I'd say, is Frederick Vesti. Pole last time out. I think it's fair to say that the second ART seat curse is well and truly over. Obviously, everyone tips Théo Pourchaire to be probably the current F2 driver who's most likely to make it to Formula 1. I think that's fair to say. Could Frederick Vesti perhaps almost embarrass Théo Pourchaire if he keeps beating him. Aaron, is that fair to say?
I think before I answer the embarrassment question, we have to point out that we know that the Théo is quick, but Fred is quick as well. Mercedes wouldn't have signed him up to their junior program if he hadn't shown potential. I mean, they've got Kimi Antonelli in their ranks there as well. So that's the sort of caliber of driver they're attracting to that young driver program. And Vesti's certainly found his feet in recent races, and that's, I think, going to help Pourchaire, because if that ART curse had continued in the second car, then Pourchaire could have just sort of rested on his laurels and known that he was the driver who was going to deliver the big results. But actually, this will be not that Pourchaire was dropping his level or anything, because Formula 2, we have to remember, is super competitive. But it's just a reminder that there is a driver in the other car who's absolutely capable of beating him. So he just has to keep himself at the right level. But we also have to remind ourselves that Théo Pourchaire is like 18 years old. So to deal with a championship battle and deal with traveling the world at 18 years old, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have been able to do it. To do that is just an incredible feat. But could Vesti embarrass Pourchaire? I don't think so, because like I said, Formula 2 is super competitive. And let's not forget, they're all in the same machinery and they get equal opportunity. So it's just coming down to who does the best job. And Pourchaire has had good races. He'll have good races the rest of this season. And, it's just a case of Vesti maybe doing a better job on that given day in history. But obviously, if he gets beaten by Vesti in the championship standings, that's going to dent his Formula One prospects, even though Sauber are looking to give him FP1 experience this year. But there doesn't really seem to be any room at the inn at Alfa Romeo at the moment, because Bottas is doing well. Zhou Guanyu has outperformed expectations. So where do you go? Because you've got talents like Oscar Piastri, who can't get a seat. If Logan Sargent goes on to win Formula 2, he would struggle to get a seat as well. So Théo, time's on his side at the moment. So losing to Frédéric Vesti wouldn't be the end of the world for him. But obviously it never looks good on paper to be beaten by a teammate.
Yeah, completely agree. 5-3 in qualifying to Frédéric Vesti, by the way. And Frédéric Vesti has out-qualified Pourchaire in for the 3 out of the 3 last races, which is a pretty incredible stat. Back in the start of the season on Twitter, and I'll take the opportunity to plug my own Twitter at _FraserFob1 if you want to go and check it out. Théo Pourchaire was my pick for the title. But Vesti, I'm really surprised at how well he's done this year. Really coming into his own, isn't he? Jim, who do you know who the sorry, putting you on the spot again here, but pole sitter in Formula 3 last year? Do you know who it was?
Pole sitter in Formula 3 last year.
You watched the highlights?
Yeah, but this is when they had the ridiculous reverse grid situation over and over. So
that's true.
I've no idea. I'm going to guess. Is he in Formula 2 this year?
He is, yeah.
I don't know, something like Clement Novalak or something. But I'm surprised. I looked through the stuff recently and I was like, oh, remember how good he was. But potentially Hauger. Hauger was all dominant last year, so that's going to probably be it.
Lawrence is looking as if he knows the answer.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute my mic in time. Yeah, you've put me on the spot there. Yes, you put me on the spot there. I think it was Hauger. If I remember, he started from pole in that final race, which I think you get pole in the final race from being first in qualifying. And I think it was the 2 earlier sprint races where they swapped them around.
But only when it's a full moon, Lawrence. Otherwise, the reverse grid was split between the top 16, I think.
I think Dennis Hauger's correct. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that would sound about right. He was, like Jim says, all conquering in F3 last year.
I'm just double checking. I'm pretty sure it was Fred.
He doesn't even know the answer to the question he's asking.
Listen, I've written down Fred. It was Frédéric Vesti, and I'm just double checking now because you're all making me doubt. Qualifying last year, Frédéric Vesti. It was Frédéric Vesti. I was doubting myself.
I apologise, Frédéric, but I mean, if you ask any question about Formula 3 in 2021, just have Hauger as your answer, and you're probably right. So you can see why we all went for that.
It's very, very true. Dominated last season, didn't he? It was Frédéric Vesti, and obviously pole last time out, pole last time we were in Le Castellet. Could it be pole this weekend? Let's wait and see. Okay, one of the big talking points last time out was track limits. I think we've got more runoff area around the Castellet than we have at Heathrow Airport. Are we going to see the same strict stewarding in terms of track limits this weekend, Jim? And would you like to see this, strict track limits that we saw last time out? Would you like to see them again this weekend for consistency, or was it a step too far?
Two answers are the same. Yes, we should see them. And two, I believe, yes, they should do it, because they've said, according to some of the things I've read this week, that they've had it consistent all season. But the problem we've had, especially in Formula 2, is most of the tracks have been street circuits, so you can't see the track limits being enforced because they just go into the wall. So while Baku has castles to enforce track limits, Austria doesn't, and they've had to have track limits enforced to the level that they were enforced, and I'm fine with it. And if they're going to be consistent, then terrific. That's the big thing. If they're not consistent this weekend and Austria was a one-off, that's a problem. So yeah, I'm all for it. And I think I've seen a lot of discourse coming from even some of the drivers, but especially pundits and experts, to say that it should be like this. And in other sports, the best analogy that I've heard, Tom Gaymore, who's on the F1 Feeder Series podcast, quoted that when he played rugby when he was younger, when he had the ball and ran out over the line, he didn't just keep running and being like, okay, well, I'm just going to run back in. He's like, no, that's where it stops. Unfortunately, with motorsport, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to stop the race now because you've gone on and we'll reset it and do this. So you put in penalties, you put in warnings. But if we're talking about the very top level of sport, or near the top level with Formula 2, then there should be no question about it. The thing that needs to be consistent, which I feel hasn't always been the case, is, okay, well, is it going to be the curb, the runoff curb on this corner? Is it going to be this? It's like, no, if we're going to go for the white line all throughout the season, that's it. That should be it, full stop. The only time I have sympathy for the drivers is when they run wide and don't gain time. So I think Lando Norris complained last weekend in Austria that he locked up in turn one, lost about a tenth or lost about half a second or something, but then also got a warning for track limits. And that's where I feel some sympathy. But you've got to have that strict rule that's consistent, whether or not you're gaining time or not not gaining time. If you had Hawkeye or some sort of laser guidance stuff to be like, okay, well, they've gone over the track here and that's it, it's black or white, it's fine. I don't want to see races have their results affected after the fact, which wasn't track limits. I'm talking about the feature race from Formula 2 in Austria. That's a totally different thing, and that I don't think is acceptable. You can't have Richard Verschoor take the podium or take the victory on the podium and then take it away. I'm really against that sort of stuff. If there's some post-race investigations, don't have the podium until they're concluded. But in terms of track limits, no, yeah, that's perfect. I want more of it. Be consistent.
Lawrence, I know you obviously you weren't on the Austria review. Aaron and I spoke about it. Aaron, I know you have the same kind of opinion. To throw, and I do as well, by the way, but to throw a swerve ball in there and to play devil's advocate, apparently the runoff area in France slows you down if you go over it. So therefore, if the drivers do go onto the runoff, should there be a penalty on top of that?
I think there should be. I think it depends on if it actually does slow the driver down. Like Jim says, the really difficult grey areas, whether or not you've gained an advantage. The phrase we've heard a lot in the past is leaving the track and gaining an advantage. How you calculate that versus the same sort of mini sector from the previous lap or in the middle of the race, that can be quite unclear whether you've actually gained time or not. But so I think you have to look at it on sort of a case-by-case basis. I think whilst you will lose time if you run all the way off the track and onto those sort of grippier, bright painted stripes that we see, I think you can run a little bit wide but still not hit those and probably still gain an advantage. But I think we need to keep the consistency. If there is a difference in how it's policed this weekend, that will create a massive problem. There has to be if there's any change this weekend, it has to be a long-term sort of policy change for Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3, and it has to be clearly communicated, or we stick with what we've got. So they've got quite a big decision on their hands. But I think the sort of tide of opinion is turning towards, let's just make the white line the track limit and make sure the drivers follow it. It's their responsibility to drive within the track limits. When it's Monaco, they make sure they don't run too wide or brake too late. So why can't they do that in Austria as well? So, of course, it's that the risk is less. The risk of getting a warning or a penalty is much less serious than binning the car into the barrier. But I think the same sort of rules should apply throughout. And also, I think that if you say, okay, look, let's take that away, but let's put things in the way in terms of track limits which slow the drivers down or deter them, everything that you list has a problem. Gravel is a problem. Sausage curbs are certainly a problem. We've seen how dangerous they can be, and there's a lot of discussion about sausage curbs at the moment, especially after that horrific accident between Hauger and Nissany in Silverstone. So I think that just making the white line the track limit clears up a lot of those problems, and I think this is sort of F1's opportunity now to run with this and be consistent, and actually in time fans and drivers alike will adjust to it. So I think I actually respect the bravery they've taken in being so clear and so almost draconian in the way they've applied the rules, because it will get the drivers to change eventually, and people are coming around to it. So yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Jim that the white line should be the track.
The only
limit.
thing that I think I would really like to see in motorsport, Formula One, and I don't know how they really introduce it, is not having a 5-second time penalty that is applied. So you have to do some mental maths on what is already quite complicated to do when you're trying to figure out tyre strategies and everything else. I understand it's great when you've got a pit stop, but when you're talking about a time penalty, in the sprint race, they're not going to go for the pit stop. And I don't know if there's something that could be done. I don't know how you have it consistent, where you have the driver not necessarily slow down because it's dangerous, but you have, like you have in the rallycross when you have the Joker lap sort of thing like that, but a longer lap that they have to go into a part of the track which is not usually accessed, and then you slow down on track and you lose positions like a Formula E actually, like we have the boost activation point. Then if they can go through a bit of the track which slows them down to make them actually run in their real position, and they have to take it within 3 laps like you've had the penalty like we're used to seeing, I'd be all for that. I think that's a better way of handling the track, because I think that was a lot of people's confusion, is when you're watching it and you see Mary cross the line, but then he doesn't actually get on the podium and you have to figure out where does he actually finish and things like that. I don't like that. It's not great. If you could have that all handled within the race itself, within the time of the race, that's the ideal. I don't know how feasible that is, but that's my harebrained idea for the week.
Yeah, completely agree. As long as on the last lap, when you can't do that, there's track limits left, right, and centre, and it turns into. But I do agree with you though that it shouldn't be that we cross the line and there's 5-second penalties, and then you're left working them out, adding up who's got what, who's finished where. Yeah, I do completely agree. Let's hope we don't have the same issue this weekend. You touched on Roberto Merhi there, Jim. Obviously, yet to have confirmation about who will be driving that Campos this weekend, whether it be Ralph Boschung, Roberto Merhi, or someone else. Ralph Boschung himself tweeted saying, as I'm still recovering, I've called Roberto Merhi after his incredible race. Firstly, to congratulate him. And secondly, that I want him to continue in my car for the next F2 race. I 100% support talent and not a driver with 100% money. Interesting, Lawrence. I suppose a question for you: if you were picking who's driving that car this weekend, and it can't be Ralph Boschung, who are you picking to jump in that car?
Well, it's a difficult one. Of course, we hope that Ralph can make a speedy recovery. Like Jim said earlier, that injury that he has sounds really tough, and the fact that he's tried on so many occasions to race and hasn't managed to shows how badly he wants to be driving an F2, but obviously can't because of his injury. So we really wish him well. But in terms of a driver to replace him, if it weren't for the fact that she's racing in France already this weekend, I would have to say Jamie Chadwick. The way that she's dominated the W Series consistently back end of last season, you looked at the way the likes of Abby Pulling was driving and coming into the sport. We thought she's going to have a real battle on her hands this year, but she's just dominated again. I think that many fans would like to see her make that step up to Formula 2, but the schedule this weekend just makes that impossible. And we talked earlier about the effect of getting some experience in before making the full-time step up to F2. So why not give a young F3 driver a go, as they're not racing this weekend? It'll be really interesting to see those top 3 drivers in F3 that have sort of slightly distanced themselves from the rest, Martins, Hadjar and Leclerc. They should all be looking to get into F2 next season based on their current performance. Perhaps Leclerc would be a very good call. He's not too young. Obviously, Martins is, I think, a year older than him, and Hadjar a few years younger again. And his name carries a certain level of interest as well with him, which I think would maybe be a good way for Campos to get their sponsors some extra airtime. So I think I'll pick out Arthur Leclerc. Not sure if it will happen, but in terms of a young upcoming driver who's clearly got the talent, who also should be able to deliver in that car and maybe help their future Formula 2 career, I think Leclerc will be a very good pick.
Yeah, really interesting. It'll be interesting to see who jumps in that seat. If it is Roberto Merri, he did a very good job last time out, so I don't think anyone would be disappointed to see him back. I want to talk about penalty points. We don't talk about it on the show very often. We obviously saw Henri Cordil getting a ban for 12 penalty points, for reaching 12 penalty points a couple of rounds ago. After picking up a penalty point last time out, Aaron, Ollie Caldwell is sitting on 11 penalty points, which means that he's 1 point away from getting a race ban. Does that change his approach going into the weekend?
I hope it doesn't. I mean, obviously you'd like to see, if a driver is driving erratically and dangerously, a shift in their mentality and their approach. But I think from what I've seen of Ollie's performances, he's doing nothing untoward. So we've seen certain drivers who will remain nameless, driving dangerously and causing certain accidents. And I think really if Ollie does pick up a penalty point and a ban, then it's a case of it is what it is. You can just simply use it as a learning experience, because for me it exposes the flaw within this penalty point system. So the track limits penalties we were just discussing in Austria, if you picked up a 5-second penalty for track limits, you picked up a penalty point on your license, which seemed ridiculous, because it could be a total of 3 millimeters that you've gone over that white line, and all of a sudden you're slapped with a penalty point. And if that's the one that tips you over to the 12, you're missing a race, which is just it's crazy. Because if let's say the championship leader had that happen to them, there would be uproar, because they've just accumulated penalty points through maybe an unsafe release, maybe speeding in the pit lane. That's, that can happen to all the drivers, and I'm not excusing it for any second. But then the track limits thing, if that's obviously, we're asking for it to be policed correctly, but should it carry a penalty point is the question.
I think you're absolutely right in that the points, the penalty point system hasn't yet adjusted to the fact that the track limits are being policed that much more strictly. So I think they definitely need to look at that again. I think perhaps what we need is almost like a driving test style system by which you have minors and majors. Track limits is a minor. Forcing someone off the track into the gravel or into a wall is a major, and some sort of a clear sort of almost ranking of severity of incidents, and then what that translates into. Because a driver who's got a race ban, who's got a lot of penalty points, could be mistaken for a really reckless driver, compared to a driver whose tyres have gone off in Austria and they keep running wide, or they get to the point where they think, well, for me to try and make this move, I have to try and push the track limit slightly. So I think definitely there needs to be some adjustment in the system to how the track limits rules have changed.
Well, they've got the reprimands, haven't they, that they give out for certain things. Like we see with the stewards in Formula One, drivers getting a reprimand for wearing the wrong T-shirt or something crazy like that. So I fully agree. There needs to be like a major and a minor sort of differentiation of what constitutes a penalty point and what doesn't.
I don't think you'd be in a situation where a driver at the front, say Dragovic, would be getting 12 penalty points from doing 12 different sessions, I presume it is, where they have the track limits violation. So although I'm sympathetic to it, and I don't know the full ins and outs of what Caldwell's or Deal's penalty points accumulation was, I do think there is something to say when you are knocking on the door of getting the race ban. So answering the question Fraser asked you, Aaron, with should Caldwell change his approach, I don't know what's accumulated those points, but not every other driver is facing the 12 points or being close to the 12 points. And I know you guys were singing all his praises for getting the points, and congratulations to him for getting the points last time at the feature race. But he was also very lucky with regards to disqualifications, time penalties for other people. I don't know how many positions Daruvala ended up dropping, like 10, 11, which all certainly helped Caldwell and somewhat flattered him. But I think, I can't remember who said it now, but one of you said that they always seem to affect the drivers towards the back of the field, and that might be because they're always in scraps because they are at the back of the field rather than the front, but they're also qualifying at the back of the field. And if we're going to want to have the better drivers racing in the better series, and this is a way which starts filtering some of these things out, that I don't think it's unfair to say Cordeal isn't one of the best drivers that we've got at the moment. And there are seats which aren't getting filled by some of the better drivers. If this is a way to kind of identify, I don't think it's not necessarily negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating conversation, but we're going to have to cut it off there because that's all we've got time for today. So my thanks to Jim, to Lawrence and for Aaron for joining me on today's show. As always, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more Formula 2 content, and let us know what you think in the comment section. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.